Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a question that suddenly became a lot more urgent and a lot more complicated. After a wave of new reporting from Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, and even a long, fiery speech from Donald Trump Jr. That question is, will the Trump administration eventually give up on mediating the Russia-Ukraine war? And the honest answer is, it's possible, but not for the reasons people usually imagine. Before we unpack the political calculus behind this, we need to start with what triggered the debate, a set of interviews, leaks, and statements that reveal just how fragile the so-called peace talks really are. Bloomberg published a significant scoop. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky gave them a phone interview while preparing to travel to London to meet leaders from the UK, Germany, and France. In that interview, Zelensky openly acknowledged that the U.S. brokered peace proposal still has major gaps, especially on two issues Washington considers the backbone of any settlement. Who controls eastern Ukraine, Donbass? What long-term security guarantees Ukraine could receive after the war? According to Zelensky, the negotiators from Ukraine and the U.S. simply do not share the same position on these core questions, and Russia has its own stance, which is again entirely different. In his words, the talks are long, difficult, but not confrontational. But not confrontational doesn't mean close to an agreement. In fact, he made it very clear, there is no deal on Donbass. None. Zero. This is important, because without an agreement on territory, there is no ceasefire, no guarantee structure, no real peace framework. Everything collapses without that peace. And that's exactly why the next piece of reporting caused a political shockwave. CBS added gasoline to the fire. President Trump told reporters in Washington that he was a little disappointed that Zelensky still hasn't read the U.S. proposal, even as negotiations drag on. Trump said his people like him, but he doesn't like the proposal. Then Trump claimed something much more dramatic. Russia has no objections to the plan. Except that's not true. The Kremlin, both Putin and his spokesperson Peskov, stated publicly that they do have objections. Some points are acceptable, others are absolutely unacceptable. They were explicit about this. So Trump's claim that Russia had no objections contradicts the Russian government's own words. Why would Trump say this? One possible explanation. He was trying to pressure Zelensky, not describe reality. By framing Russia as the reasonable side, Trump shifts the blame for stalled talks onto Kyiv, not Moscow. It's a negotiating tactic, classic Trump style: amplify pressure, create leverage, force movement. But then something happened that made analysts wonder whether the real shift wasn't about Zelensky, but about Trump's own willingness to remain in the middle of this war at all. The third piece of reporting comes from The Guardian, which published a detailed write-up of Donald Trump Jr.'s recent speech in the Middle East. Journalists sometimes joke that if you want to understand Donald Trump Sr.'s real thinking, don't watch the official briefings. Listen to Donald Trump Jr. And this speech was intense. Trump Jr. said openly that his father might abandon the effort to mediate the Russia-Ukraine war because, in his view, Ukrainian elites had already fled abroad, leaving behind peasants to fight. He also repeated a long-standing position of his: Ukraine is more corrupt than Russia, a claim he has made many times before. He accused Zelensky of dragging out the war because he knows he won't win an election after peace. He argued that European sanctions actually benefited Russia by driving up global energy prices. And he shared a dramatic anecdote that he saw a lot of Bugattis and Ferraris with Ukrainian plates in Monaco, implying Ukrainian elites had escaped with their wealth. He offered no evidence for this, but the message was unmistakable. Now, the point here isn't whether Trump Jr. is right or wrong. The point is something else. He is consistent, completely consistent. His position today is the same position he had in early 2025, in late 2024, and during the campaign. This matters because within the Trump orbit, Trump Jr. isn't a sideshow. He's part of the core political identity of the MAGA movement. His speeches often reflect the emotional baseline of the Trump inner circle. So what does that baseline look like? Deep skepticism toward Ukraine, a belief that corruption makes Ukraine unreliable, a narrative that Europe is freeloading, and the view that the US shouldn't play global babysitter with a checkbook. If you combine those attitudes with the current stalled negotiations, it forces us to confront the central question: will the Trump administration abandon its mediation role? Short answer: they might, especially in the short term. But the full picture is more complex. You have to separate emotion from strategy, speeches from statecraft, and pressure tactics from real policy. Let's break it down. Why Trump might walk away. 1. The talks are stuck. Badly. Russia, Ukraine, and the US don't even agree on the basic map of eastern Ukraine. Without territorial consensus, the whole process is like trying to build a house without a foundation. 2. Trump hates open-ended commitments. For decades, Trump has been consistent on one thing. He hates situations where the US spends money without seeing results. A mediation that drags on, produces no deal, and requires constant political capital. That's the definition of something Trump would cut off. 3. His base doesn't support long-term involvement. Polling shows that Republican voters are increasingly skeptical of US involvement in the war. Trump listens to his base, and Trump Jr.'s comments reflect that mood. 4. Pressure tactics only work if someone moves. If Zelensky refuses territorial concessions, and he has made that stance extremely clear, Trump may decide the US has nothing more to gain by staying in the middle. In this scenario, walking away becomes leverage too. It signals to Ukraine that the US won't fight its battles indefinitely. Why Trump might stay involved. 1. Ukraine is still tied to NATO's future. Even if Trump dislikes NATO, he knows abandoning Eastern Europe entirely destabilizes US influence across the continent. Mediation keeps the US at the center of Europe's security architecture, even if Trump wants Europe to pay more. 2. Mediation gives leverage over Russia. Even Trump, who has a different style toward Moscow, understands that being the broker gives Washington power. Walking away cedes ground to China or Turkey, both of whom would love to step in. 3. There's political value in being the guy who ended the war. Trump loves big wins. Ending the Ukraine war, or even claiming to have ended it, is politically valuable. So abandoning mediation entirely isn't automatically the smart play for him. Based on everything we know, the most likely trajectory looks like this. Short term, next several months, higher chance Trump steps back. He might pause mediation, slow the process, or let Europeans take the lead. This gives him time to recalibrate and forces Kyiv to feel pressure from financial constraints. Medium to long term, 6 to 18 months. He'll likely re-engage if conditions shift, if Russia faces battlefield or economic setbacks, if Europe pushes for a deal. If the war drags on in a way that hurts global markets, Trump will have incentives to jump back in and claim the credit for brokering peace. This isn't inconsistency, it's negotiation strategy. Trump's approach to foreign policy has never been a straight line. It's a series of pressure waves. He pushes, retreats, advances, bluffs, pauses, and then strikes when the opponent is weak or when the timing benefits him. So will he abandon mediation? Probably temporarily, but permanently? Very unlikely. There's too much political reward, too much geopolitical leverage, and too big an opportunity to reshape Europe's future for him to walk away forever. What we're seeing right now isn't the collapse of Trump's peace plan. It's the first collision between campaign-style rhetoric and the brutal reality of a war where neither side wants to give up territory. Zelensky wants security. Russia wants recognition. Trump wants control. None of these goals overlap naturally, so talks were always going to get messy. But the most revealing signal came from Trump Jr.'s speech, not because he sets policy, but because he reflects the emotional center of the movement that put Trump back in the White House. And that emotional center is tired of Ukraine, skeptical of Europe, and deeply impatient with long, expensive foreign entanglements. In that environment, Trump pausing mediation is not only possible, it is strategically logical. But abandoning it forever would mean forfeiting a historic diplomatic victory, and that is something Trump is unlikely to surrender. This story is far from over, and the next few months will tell us whether the Trump team sees Ukraine as an opportunity or a burden,